What could be better than an absolutely enormous gun attached to an adamantium death machine? Well, if that gun's some sort of fancy relic, and it does everything better than the standard version. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're going to have a look through the Imperial Knight Relics. We're continuing our journey through the Imperial Knight's Codex over the last week, and I think it's time to have a look at all this fancy war gear and when we should use it in our games. Now, just to start out by saying that the Knight Relics are some of the best relics in the entire game. I think that the main issue is that standard relics usually go on upgrading something like a chainsword, a power fist or a thunder hammer, which are all good weapons, but they don't really compare with upgrading an Avenger Gatling cannon to being something better than it was. They're basically moderately sized buffs on already very, very powerful guns, so that's one of the reasons why the Knight Relics are just quite so strong. Without further ado, let's get into them. We'll go through them all one by one. We'll start with the generic relics that are available to all houses. First we have Sanctuary, which gives the bearer a 5-up invulnerable save in close combat. This is a very, very strong relic for Imperial Knights, particularly something like a Knight Gallant or Knight Valiant that's going to be getting up close to the enemy. This is really a relic that you should pick in based on which game you are playing and what your opponent is. If your opponent has a lot of scary units and their main way of killing knights is by charging in and hitting them to death with thunder hammers, for example, then this really is the defensive relic that you should be going for. Having that 5+ invulnerable save that you can use rotate iron shields to get to a 4+ can be the difference between your knight just dying outright or it living just on a few wounds to be able to strike back and maybe kill whatever was trying to take it down. Sanctuary is a relic that I don't pick myself enough, and I really regret it in some games when I've just been killed by a fighty character. I realise that Sanctuary probably would have saved me. Next up we have Ravager, the Relic Reaper Chainsword. This is a flat upgrade on the regular Reaper Chainsword, where it's strength +8 rather than +6 and AP -4. You can also reroll hit rolls of 1 for this weapon. This will allow you to wound other knights on 2s and go straight through the armor save of anything with a 3-up save and no invul. That reroll 1s also makes it more reliable. This is definitely one to think about picking up if you're facing other knights. Typically, if I was running a Knight Gallant, I would prefer to use the Paragon Gauntlet over this, because that thing is nuts. But if you're using a knight such as, say, a Knight Warden or Errant, something with a Reaper Chainsword, and you're playing against other knights, then this is certainly a decent pick. Again, this is one of the relics that you should probably be changing from game to game depending on opponent, and buying it in through the heirlooms of the household stratagem. Moving on, now we'll talk about that Paragon Gauntlet. So the Paragon Gauntlet upgrades the Thunderstrike Gauntlet. It's strength ×2, AP -4, damage 8, yes that's damage 8, it's mental, and importantly it doesn't have the -1 to hit that the regular Thunderstrike Gauntlet has. There aren't many damage 8 weapons in the game for good reason. This will go through just about anything. It'll insta-kill a Demon Prince if they even fail one save. It'll kill a standard Questoris Knight from full health if you can get 3 wounds through on them, which is downright likely if this is paired with a Gallant. Also, because it has no minus to hit, it makes Death Grip a lot more likely to go off. So if you're playing a Knight Gallant and you want to just increase its damage potential against other heavy hitters such as enemy knights, the Paragon Gauntlet is a very, very good pick, one of the strongest relics in the whole codex. Next we have the Armour of Sainted Ion. This increases the knight's armor save to a 2-up save, and this is very powerful indeed. Knights are enormous models with a lot of wounds, so upgrading the armor from a 3-up to a 2-up can have an enormous amount of value and potentially save you from needing to rotate iron shields when you're shot with anything that's AP2, for example. This one's a really good example of why a Knight Relic is often better than a Space Marine Relic, for example, because the Space Marines can buy an armor that gives a single character with 4 wounds a 2-up save, whereas you can buy a model that has 24 wounds a 2-up save, so it just has miles more value. I think about picking this up against any matchup that has majority AP -2 weapons or worse. It's not going to help you very much against, say, Eldar with a whole load of lance weapons, but if you're fighting, say, Space Marine Assault Cannon spam or something like that, it's certainly worth it. Next we have Endless Fury, which is one of my favourite relics in the whole book. The Avenger Gatling cannon it replaces is generally an all-purpose weapon that will do decent damage to whatever you point it at, and this just makes it better in every way. Endless Fury is 36 inches, heavy 14, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2, and has the special rule that each unmodified hit roll of 6 with this weapon scores 2 hits instead of 1. So on average you're getting something like 11 hits with this weapon. with good strength, good AP and good damage, so it'll stack some wounds on pretty much anything in the game. Endless Fury is particularly good in matchups with negative to hit modifiers, such as say Plague Bearers, because those 6s to hit are unmodified, so the few hits that you get through, a lot of them are going to be 6s and a lot of them are going to proc additional hits. The same goes for Eldar Flyers, and this is also particularly good in Overwatch, because each of your 6s that hit in Overwatch will count as 2 hits too. So excellent weapon. I typically buy this in on my Warlord with the relic that I can't choose each game, because there isn't really a single matchup that this won't be valuable. Next up is Judgment, the relic Storm Spear rocket pod. This replaces the Storm Spear rocket pod that essentially has 3 crack missiles, it has AP -3, 60-inch range, and you can reroll failed hit rolls for this weapon. If you are running a Storm Spear pod and you can buy this in for just 1 additional command point, certainly go for it. The rerolls to hit will generally be good for another hit with that boosted rocket profile per turn. The main downside for this one is the opportunity cost of not being able to pick a more powerful relic, say that 2-up Armor Save or Endless Fury, and it's a little bit more give or take if you have to buy it in as your second extra relic, which would cost you 2 command points than the Heirlooms of the Conquest stratagem. So for me, it's a very, very good relic that's unfortunately a bit outshone by the competitors. I would say the same is true of Sky Shield. This is the upgraded Icarus autocannon. This goes to Heavy 6, Strength 7, AP -2, Damage 2, and it retains the rule of the Icarus autocannon where it hits better against fly units and worse against non-fly units. It is a very good weapon, and decently stronger than the weapon it replaces, but the Icarus autocannon isn't the strongest weapon you've got anyway. You're much better off upgrading the Avenger Gatling cannon, as the extra bonus on the Avenger will be far stronger than any extra bonus on a little autocannon. So again, outshone by other relics, I'm afraid. Next we have Helm of the Nameless Warrior, Questor Imperialis only. You add 1 to hit rolls made for the wearer's attacks characteristic in the fight phase. This will be best on one of your non-gallant Questorist knights, say a Warden with a Reaper Chainsword. It can be used if you particularly want to have the advantage of being almost as fighty as a Gallant while retaining that Avenger Gatling cannon or something. There's numerous fairly similar ways to buff Knight's melee profiles. You could combine this with say Knight Seneschal Warlord traits to give it a 2-up to hit and 1 extra attack, so there you really will be truly as strong as a Knight Gallant in the charge phase, while retaining a gun. So I can see the positives. Next we have another Questor Imperialis relic, the Banner of Macarius Triumphant. This gives your knight objective secured, and it counts as the bearer being 10 models for the purpose of contesting the objective with enemy units, and it also gives +1 leadership to nearby Imperial units. Typically, knights will often not have too much trouble in stomping any troops to dust if they're on an objective, so I probably would pass this up for something that does even better damage output and just kill whatever it was on the objective and then stand on it. Next up is Traitor's Pyre, which we've already talked about in the Knight Valiant video that came out on Friday. This is again a very, very strong relic. If you're running a Knight Valiant, then I would certainly take this if I possibly could. It allows reroll to wound rolls with the Conflagration Cannon, the enormous Mega Flamer that the Valiant has. It turns that Flamer into a true all-purpose weapon, and it will absolutely decimate whatever it hits. The main choice is whether you want to play a Valiant model, and whether you want to include it as an Questor Imperialis rather than Questor Mechanicus. If both of those are true, then take this, no questions asked. Moving on to the Questor Mechanicus relics now, we've got the Mark of the Omnissiah. Roll a d6 at the start of your turn. On a 6, the bearer regains d3 lost wounds, and on any other results, it regains 1 lost wound. This is a very marginal defensive buff in my mind. It won't even come into play when your knight hasn't been damaged, and in general you're looking at only 1 or 2 wounds regained over the course of the battle. I think there are stronger relics out there than this, and I would leave it at home personally. Next up is the Helm Dominatus. This is the armature buffing relic that can often go on the Knight's Preceptor to combo with his rerolls of 1 for the armatures nearby him. You get to choose 1 unit within 24 inches of the bearer, and until the end of the phase, you add 1 to hit rolls by all attacks with armature models that are within 6 inches of the bearer. So theoretically this could be very good on a whole pack of armature Helverins that you could have hitting on 2s rerolling 1s whenever they're targeting a unit that's within 24 inches of this knight. I think it's a relic that you'd have to build around to make worth it, but it could be an unbelievably devastating amount of firepower on 1 unit if you do. Next up for the Questor Mechanicus is Call's Wrath. Now here's a weapon with a bad reputation. It upgrades the Castellan's Plasma Decimator to be flat better than it was before. Instead, it will now be 48-inch range, strength 9, AP -4 and flat 3 damage when it is overcharged. That really makes it an anti-everything weapon. It's got enormous AP, enormous damage and a decent volume of shots and high strength. Obviously you do risk doing a mortal wound or two to yourself, but frankly the damage output is more than worth it. This is particularly brutal when combined with certain Raven stratagems or crassed relics, and it helps to make the Castellan the bogeyman that would annihilate enemy tanks no questions asked for a good half a year. Now the Castellan's damage output hasn't changed, but its points cost has gone up, so it's not quite sufficient for its points anymore, but if you're taking a Castellan, I would absolutely certainly take this relic, as it's a massive flat upgrade on an already very strong gun. And now into the household specific relics. House Terran gets the Thunder of Voltoris, which is a relic battle cannon with strength 9, AP -2, damage D3, and you roll 3d6 and discard the lowest result for determining how many shots it gets. So that's a nice little buff on the standard battle cannon. It makes a Crusader or Paladin Knight a lot more viable in a House Terran build. Next we have Mark of the Lance, which is House Griffith's relic. It's alright, it basically gives you a chance to inflict a few mortal wounds on the charge, similar to their Warlord trait. I'm not sure I'd bother with this one, because if you're charging an enemy unit, you're generally going to hit it very, very hard with the Knight anyway, and you might kill it even without this buff, so I'd honestly buy something else. If you're going close combat, then the Paragon Gauntlet or the Ravager Chainsword might serve you better. We have Angel's Grace for House Hawkshroud. This is a good situational relic for if you're fighting a bunch of mortal wound spam and you're playing as House Hawkshroud. Essentially it ignores mortal wounds on a 4-up in your opponent's psychic phase. Certainly not one to use in every matchup, but if you're playing House Hawkshroud and you're facing a lot of psychic spam, then this is definitely worth buying in on one of your knights. House Cadmus gets the Hunter's Eye, which is ignores cover on the bearer's ranged attacks, particularly if you're playing something like Space Marines who get a lot of value out of their cover saves, as they have good armour, but not often always having invulnerable saves. Honour's Bite is the House Morton relic. This is another relic Reaper Chainsword. It upgrades the standard Reaper Chainsword profile to have AP -4, and each wound roll of 6 inflicts D3 mortal wounds on the target in addition to its normal damage. I think that this is pretty much a toss-up whether you'd go for this or the Ravager, the other relic Reaper Chainsword. Both have their merits, and I think that they both have a fairly similar damage output. And now we're moving on to the Mechanicus household relics. House Raven gets the Banner Inviolate. This is quite a nice buff, as it allows you to reroll hit rolls of 1 in the fight phase for House Raven models while they're within 6 inches of the bearer. If you are getting multiple knights into close combat or thinking about it, and this could certainly boost their damage potential, it might well be worth throwing this on one of your knights, particularly if you've got a bunch of knights that are going to go up against a shooting gun line, because then you have no reason not to throw all of your knights up and try and stomp on the enemy as much as possible, and this will help them do that. Next we have the Auric Mask from House Volker. The opponent must use an extra d6 when taking a morale test within 12 inches of the bearer, and use the highest result for their morale test. Leadership debuffs and shenanigans like this are generally a little bit underwhelming, but maybe you could buy it in if you were facing a lot of weedy units like a lot of guardsman units and you wanted to try and scare some of them off. This is a fair bit better than a -1 leadership debuff, so there is something. House Tyrannis has Fury of Mars. This is a relic thermal cannon, which has a boosted range of 48 inches, a strength of 9, AP -4 and damage D6, just like the regular one, but you always activate the standard melter rule for this weapon, even if you're outside of half range of it, so you'll always be rolling those 2d6 and picking the highest for damage output. The 48-inch range is quite nice, and the damage output is marginally better. I don't rate this anywhere near as highly as Endless Fury, but in some matchups when you're facing enemy tanks at long range, this can be exactly what you want to make sure you can hit them, and you aren't going to be outranged. And finally we come to the very best of the household specific relics, which is House Krast's Headsman's Mark. Now this is hilariously brutal on a Crusader or on a Valiant or Castellan. If you're targeting anything with a wounds characteristic of 10 or more, you add 1 to the damage characteristic of all weapons. And if you're targeting a Titanic unit, you add 2 to the damage characteristic of all weapons. So straight away you can see that this is pretty much your anti-knight relic. adding 2 to the damage of every single weapon on your knight is absolutely nuts. If you do get lucky and manage to sneak through a wound with your heavy stubber against an enemy super heavy, then that'll be a flat 3 damage, which is just ludicrous. This is strongest on the higher rate of fire weapons, so the Avenger Gatling Cannon could be up to damage 4 with this. The Castellan Siegebreaker Cannons get genuinely nasty against knights and tanks, and of course it can increase that Plasma Decimator up to a damage of 4 as well on a Castellan. If you're playing Housecrafts and you're fighting against any amount of enemy armour, then this is pretty much an auto-include. It really is so good for fighting these targets. So my overall take on the Knight's Relics is that they're very strong indeed. You should certainly select one relic as your Warlord's Relic, and then following this you should be buying them in with the Heirlooms of the Household stratagem after you've seen your opponent's army. Picking the right relic for the right matchup is one of the ways where you win or lose games with Knights, particularly the decision whether to use Sanctuary or Paragon Gauntlet or Armour of Sainted Iron is a big decision, and you shouldn't just default to one single pick for every single game. There's really no reason to, besides perhaps with Endless Fury, which is pretty much universally awesome. So thanks very much for listening to another Imperial Knights Tactics video. We'll be back again tomorrow, where we're going to have a look at the Questoris Pattern Knights. I think we'll cover the Errant, Warden and Paladin tomorrow, and probably save the Preceptor and Crusader for videos of their own as they operate a bit differently. So thanks again for listening. Feel free to like and subscribe if you'd like to see more videos like this. Auspex Tactics would certainly welcome your support, and I'll hope to see you guys in the next video.